The princess's first marriage was a complete disaster. Zoe was sailing across the Mediterranean waves, heading towards her happiness with a young emperor, only to discover at one of the ports that her betrothed had already died. One could almost cry out, "It's all over." But not quite. The girl returned to her homeland and eventually became an empress. Zoe was one of 3 daughters of Byzantine Emperor Constantine VIII. He was widowed and could marry again to have a son and heir, but he didn't want to. Courtiers whispered, "What a strange man," while the emperor simply loved his late wife. But a man had to ascend the throne, so where would he find one? The emperor came up with a plan. He would marry off his daughters, and surely one of the sons-in-law would turn out to be a clever fellow, and he would do this sometime later. There was no hurry. While waiting for her fate to be decided, Zoe spent her time on 2 activities: entertaining lovers and making cosmetics. She excelled in both. She was young and beautiful, with a fiery spirit. Why waste time? Suitors flocked around her. Historian Michael Sellis described the emperor's daughter as remarkably fair-skinned, with large eyes and long, golden hair. Zoe's skin practically glowed. Byzantine ladies openly envied her. No redness, no blemishes, not even a tiny wrinkle. As it turned out, the princess spent her nights poring over old manuals, reading recipes for potions. Some she invented herself. She set up a real cosmetic laboratory next to her chambers. It had everything: facial and body creams, skincare masks, hair balms, and special treatments for brittle nails. The brand, Zoe Porphyrogenita, was exclusively for the emperor's daughter. It's a pity, really. She could have made quite a fortune. Father came to his senses when the year 1028 came. The emperor was on his deathbed, and his daughters had grown up considerably. Zoe was already 50. One of the princesses had died, and Theodora, the other, refused to marry. Zoe, however, was not opposed. So she was married off to the prefect of Constantinople, Roman Argyrus. The wedding took place, and 3 days later, the emperor peacefully passed away. Roman Argyrus and Zoe became emperor and empress. Interestingly, the new ruler of Byzantium wanted to have an heir. Yes, he knew his wife was 50, but Zoe took such good care of herself. She seemed so youthful. They began to try, but of course, nothing came of it. You can't fool biological clocks. Disappointed, the emperor decided to seek happiness in the arms of his second sister. But Zoe found out immediately and, in a fit of rage, sent Theodora to a monastery. She harshly scolded her husband, banished him from her chambers, and started accepting suitors again. The princess had many admirers, and the empress gained even more. Meanwhile, Roman Argyrus began to give in. It's quite possible he was poisoned, a theory widely discussed even in the 11th century. The emperor passed away. Free Zoe that very night called for Patriarch Alexius and demanded to be married to her beloved named Michael. Thus, the eunuch's brother found himself on the throne as Michael IV. The emperor was 24 years old and his wife was already 56. At first, Michael pretended to be passionately in love, but over time, the act grew tiresome. After all, he had achieved what he wanted. Zoe was offended. After all, she had elevated the young man. But Michael had developed a taste for power. He began to lavish money, granting titles and palaces to his relatives, all while locking his wife in her own bedroom and forbidding anyone from approaching her without his personal permission. Under pressure from Michael, Zoe adopted his nephew so he could inherit the throne in the future. But then, unexpectedly, Michael fell ill and soon died. For the sake of peace and stability in the state, the advisors persuaded Zoe to recognize the adopted Michael Caliphates as emperor. And that's exactly what he had been waiting for. He swiftly arrested his aunt and exiled her to the island of Principe. However, the people intervened, and what an intervention it was. A riot broke out in Constantinople, with Patriarch Alexius loudly proclaiming, according to the records of a Byzantine historian, "Where are you, our rightful lady? How could a base-born dog raise a hand against you?" The women of Constantinople gathered in massive numbers and stormed the imperial palace. Such a sight had never been seen before. The usurper had no choice but to flee the capital. Zoe was restored to her position, and at the same time, her sister was brought to Constantinople. The assembled council had to decide who would rule now, both women or just one of them. Initially, it was officially considered that there were two empresses in power in Byzantium. But Zoe remembered her long-standing grievance. Share power with her sister? No way. The empress decided to remarry so the state would have a ruler. She chose one of her former lovers, Constantine Menomachus. They celebrated their wedding in June, and Constantine immediately donned the crown. In essence, this was a marriage of convenience. Constantine treated his wife with great respect, but there were no intimate relations between them. The emperor had an official mistress, and Zoe had no objections to that. Moreover, Zoe was tired. She was already an older woman. She allowed Constantine to govern while she indulged in fashionable attire and quiet gatherings with friends. Over time, she became more religious, actively engaged in helping the poor, visited prisoners in jails, and generously distributed alms. The empress passed away in the year 1050, and since miracles began to occur near her tomb, Constantine Menomachus even decided to canonize her. The church, however, did not consider his request. While Zoe may have led a righteous life in her later years, everyone remembered her 3 marriages and numerous lovers.